Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
Who are working in my company. I'm a black man. I own a company. I hire a Latino. The Latino comes back and complains about the African Americans because the Latino thinks because I'm African, I don't have any relationship with the African American. The Latino comes to me and tell me that you are an immigrant. I'm an immigrant. That African American cannot work. I have Jose, I have Gonzalez, my brothers who know how to work very well. You need to fire the African Americans and I will bring a lot of hardworking Latinos who work for your company. This is my company as a black man. My company. I was a contractor at Quantico Marine Base in Virginia. A contractor for General Electrics. And the Latino workers that are hired, they are snitching on the African American workers that are hired for me to fire the African Americans so they can bring Latinos to take their place.
By now, I'm sure that many of you have already seen it. Black Twitter and Black YouTube and Facebook have been passing this video and it's been making the rounds. But this, of course, is far from the only time that a black immigrant in particular has called out anti-black racism from the Hispanic community.
We give you a word of advice. Man, you got to watch what you say when you say it. Because this is what I'm saying. Because you don't know who speaks Spanish. Yo soy cubano, ¿me entiendes? Pero yo soy cubano. Y cuando habla la gente negra, estoy hablando de mí también. Okay, but I'm just saying, you need to watch what you say. Okay, I'm just letting you know though. When you talk about people, especially black people, man, watch what you're saying. I ain't recording you. I'm recording myself. I'm recording you now. So, you know what, that's what I'm saying. They be talking that shit Spanish, thinking people don't understand their ass. Yo soy cubano. Cuando hablando de mierda de negro, estoy hablando de mí también. So when you talk about black folks in Spanish, a bunch of them understand what the fuck you're saying. No, y'all talking that nigga shit Spanish. Yo soy cubano, yo entiendo. Cuando hablas esa mierda de negro, estoy hablando de mí también.
Now, I put those two videos together to make a point that you have two black immigrants, one who the Hispanics knew was an immigrant when they were talking to him, and the other one who that racist woman in that Dollar General didn't know was an immigrant, but they both made the anti-black racism for the Hispanic community public. This is what we need more of, because the practice of egregious acts of anti-black racism is not limited simply to those who are classified as white. White supremacy has always relied on the use of buffer groups, individuals who are not classified as white, but who get to be white adjacent, if you will, who also carry out anti-black racism. And everyone who takes part in it knows it. There are no unwitting dupes here. Everybody is fully aware of what they're doing. Now, in this case, I want to make sure we give credit where it's due. If black immigrants are standing on business, if they're on code and they call this mess out, then I got no problem with them. We have always known that this mess was going on, but what we haven't had are black immigrants who have been willing to say it. And the reason for that is because you've had too many black immigrants, the majority in fact, who are the first ones to say, I'm not black, or don't call me black, I'm Nigerian, I'm Ghanaian, I'm Guyanese. Well, there's no anti-black racism where I come from because everyone is black. Meanwhile, these people are colonized out the gills. That you've got black immigrants who are calling this stuff out, it shouldn't be seen as some sort of extraordinary event, but it is. It shouldn't be the case. But why? Well, it's because these black immigrants in many cases have been claiming this I'm not black stuff to the very racists from Latin America and elsewhere that these two black men rightly called out. This is why the brother in the first video had the experience that he had. So understand that. Being a tether is not some victimless crime. It emboldens and encourages all of these anti-black racists to pull all kinds of dirt against us. And it's also bad for black immigrants because it's exactly the kind of backstabbing that made it where black immigrants had to flee their home countries. These same people who try to undermine us here, where do you think they learned that kind of cowardly behavior from? They were doing it in their home countries first. I need our black immigrant family to understand something. White supremacy didn't let black immigrants in starting in the 60s out of the goodness of their hearts. You should know by now they have none. They didn't do it because they thought that black immigrants were bringing useful skills either. Whenever these white supremacists talk about skilled labor, they're talking about other Europeans and maybe a few Asians, but they're not talking about black immigrants. None of them can even tell you who a black architect is that they've hired or some sort of black contractor. That's not what they're talking about. They let black immigrants in because after the 1960s, white power needed a way to be able to have a propaganda victory. It was about them being able to lie and claim, hey, all that stuff that these foundational black Americans were saying about us being racist, that's not true. Why? Look at these Negroes over here. Look at this black Negro over here in this corporate job. Look at this Negro who we put in this or that political office. How about this Negro working at this university? How about this Negro who's a contractor for this or that government entity? White power used its position to choose who the winners are going to be. So they totally left out the part that this black person who was over here at this company or this university, they were an immigrant who white power selectively chose. They left out that the black person who was at this or that elected office, like the Congressional Black Caucus, the majority of whom are immigrants, well, it's because white donors selected these black immigrants and gave money to them. These people were groomed, like Barack Obama and Kamala Harris, ? The reason this or that black immigrant got this loan is because white power had set aside specifically for immigrants, and because they know who they let into this country. At the turn of the 20th century, America had let some black immigrants in, but they didn't vet them very well. So as a result, they accidentally let in a bunch of radicals and activists, true soldiers, like Dr. Ben, Harry Belafonte, Arthur Schomburg, Stokely Carmichael, and others. But that's why they stopped letting immigrants in. They closed that door and said, ooh, we made a mistake with that one, all the way up into the 1960s. And the only reason that changed was because black Americans put political pressure on the government to do so. Except white power knew exactly what it was that we were doing. We were going to solidify the black world under the banner of black empowerment. We were bringing more black people here to support the movement of fighting and crushing anti-black racism. The government knew that, so they decided, okay, black people have exposed how racist we are to the world. So if we're going to be opening up the gates and allowing immigrants back in, well, we can't justify selectively excluding black people. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure this time there's a stringent program in place, one that's going to be very aggressive to vet these immigrants in their home countries just to make sure that they're going to be licking boots like we want them to. And then we're going to make sure that we got a system in place to indoctrinate them once they get here. Give them a pat on the back and give them a pat on the head and tell them you're not like those other Negroes. So you want to be careful about those guys. Those guys make trouble. So you're going to keep your head down and do as you're told, right? Yes, sir, boss. Everybody knows the rules of racism, including immigrants. And I need to make sure that our black immigrant family understands white supremacy didn't bring you here to do you any favors. They brought you here as a political counter lever to what we were doing, the pressure that we brought. They brought you here so they could have some tokens on hand who they could point to. Now, whether or not you choose to be a token, that's completely and thoroughly up to you. But it needs to be said that way too many of the black immigrants who showed up here the last 60 or so years, that's exactly what they chose to do. And even these other immigrants recognize it. That's what they're telling you. They know that there's a lot of black people who have chosen to play the fool for white supremacy, and that these other groups recognize it. So we can give credit to these two gentlemen for making public what we've known all along, and it's important that people actually see this. But something else also needs to be known. White power uses racial discrimination to make sure that the same anti-black racists get to leapfrog over us by selectively denying black employees employment or advancement, or by making it easy for immigrants to get bank loans and other forms of financial assistance for their businesses. And then these same people come to the U.S. and can't wait to discriminate against black Americans. And when it comes to anti-black racism, there's been a number of incidents and even lawsuits pointing out that a lot of this stuff is coming from the Hispanic community. You go to the local Quickie Mart or the gas station or your oil change at Walmart in a majority black city, and 6 months ago you might have seen a mostly black staff at these places. You could come back 6 months later and now you see half the staff is from south of the border. In a town where there are only like 10-15% of the population, you'll start seeing that kind of thing. We also saw this in construction and landscaping and in the trades as well. And you see that there's a Hispanic manager at one of these places, even though that person didn't work there just 6 months ago. But as soon as they show up, they immediately get promoted to manager. No black person can just walk into any business in any town that's majority non-black and think that they're going to be a manager. And what happens when they get into those positions? What you saw in these videos. They will at first be pleasant toward their black co-workers, at least as long as there's just one or two of them there. But then a lot of them, as soon as they think they're in a position to start making hiring decisions, then after that, they immediately begin specifically discriminating against only black employees or only against black job applicants or only against black contractors. They specifically singled black people out for that. So white power gets to do its dirt and hide its hands. White supremacy wants to make sure that it can pick and choose who the winners are. Success under white supremacy is not based on hard work or merit, and everybody knows it. These are just empty words that white supremacy uses to try to launder its own moral degeneracy. And then you got people like Nuri Martinez and her racist pals on the LA City Council. These are individuals who have done everything that they could to try to racially purge black people from these cities, and now that you got the orange man who's carrying out mass deportations, these exact same individuals who could not wait to discriminate against black people, who didn't want black people working in businesses that they were at, who didn't want black people in schools where they were at, who did everything they could to make sure that black people could not make a living or be able to even live in areas where they are, and now these same individuals, in the places where they've done everything that they could to try to exclude black people, they're asking, where are the black people at to stick up for us? Gee, sounds kind of like your white liberals in San Francisco whenever they're complaining about the lack of black support for their pet issues, doesn't it? This is the reason why there was not and could never be a black-brown alliance. Because black people have spent the last 70 years bending over backwards trying to do the kumbaya thing with everybody. Meanwhile, you got these other groups who we're told that we're supposed to be allying ourselves with, and have been rampantly discriminating against us. But of course, none of this is news. Black people have noticed this going back at least 70 years. And yet we let a few people tell us, oh, you should ignore those guys over there. They're just a few bad actors. There's just a handful of bad apples. This is just people who are confused because of the legacy of colonialism in Latin America, don't you know? Just give them some time and... The people, by the way, who tell us this stuff, these individuals are usually Hispanic academics, people who in many cases identify themselves as politically to the left. Some of them may even claim to be Marxist, that kind of thing. And the basis of Marxism, class struggle, that was the very genesis of how a lot of black people got pulled into the whole black-brown alliance rhetoric. A lot of black people, particularly during the early 20th century, bought into it because that entire line of rhetoric was based not on race, but upon class struggle. That's what Marxism's about. The reason that this is important to note is that during the early 20th century, a lot of black thinkers and activists and what the white media and government try to call radicals had gone along with Marxist ideologies. Everybody from Paul Robeson to you name it. Even though they may not have been out-and-out Marxists, they certainly were sympathetic to the ideology. Prior to the civil rights movement, you had a lot of black people, including some of our grandmaster teachers who, during their youth, they were looking for some sort of hard-line oppositional ideology to white supremacy. So a lot of them, they actually got pulled into the idea that Marxism represented that because the capitalist class in the U.S. complained about it so much. But they became disillusioned soon enough when they realized that their fellow white Marxist allies were not in favor of black empowerment at all. These white Marxists, they simply wanted a better place for themselves under white supremacy while maintaining the very racial pecking order that black people were trying to take down. Dr. King remarked on that when he was talking about how there were people who had no problem with talking about racism so long as it was things that didn't require the transfer of money for money to change hands. You could go ahead and integrate a lunch counter because white supremacy is not based on lunch counters being segregated. It's based on the control of resources. So when you start talking about that, all of a sudden a lot of your white allies start going, we should change the subject. It's all about class, don't you know? Dr. King was no socialist, by the way. He was no Marxist either. But as an activist of the left, he did come into contact with those people because he traveled widely and he came into contact with all kinds of individuals who expressed all kinds of ideas. But he understood that the issue here was about race. It had to be about black first, just like Malcolm X. Malcolm X was also widely traveled, but he wasn't going along with Marxist anything. That whole line about Marxism and class struggle, that had long been used as a gateway drug to get black people from talking about race and instead get them to be chasing a red herring of talking about class. Even the Black Panthers were involved in that. Fred Hampton, the man who J. Edgar Hoover feared would be the successor to Dr. King, Fred Hampton made no secret that he was a Marxist. He was an out-and-out Marxist. Not just thought to be one, not suspected, he actually was. And he remained one up until the day that he was assassinated. There's nothing necessarily wrong with getting a university education, but the problem is that from Marxism to feminism, too many bad ideas have crept their way into the black community through black leaders, quote unquote, who were themselves indoctrinated by anti-black forces on these college campuses. And the myth of the black-brown alliance also has similar roots. The next time you have some Che Guevara wannabe slamming their gums trying to convince you that the anti-black racism in Latin culture is nothing more than the, quote, echoes of colonialism, totally ignoring how the vast majority are talking about La Raza, better the race, and calling black people every racial slur in Spanish they can think of, that chatter about colonialism means nothing. It is a lie to put forward the idea that people were deceived or otherwise tricked. Nobody tricked anyone, nobody lied to anyone. This was plain opportunism. Full stop. The people you see out in LA waving foreign flags and claiming to be victims of racism now, these are the same people who don't identify as brown. They identify as white, always have. And they use every rhetorical trick in the book to make excuses for this. Many of them just falsely claiming that, well, whenever we look on census forms or job forms, we don't quite see the right classification for how we identify, so we just say white. It's all cap. As they see it, they're determined to get the same entree to white society that all these other immigrant groups have gotten in the past, like the Irish, Germans, Italians, Jews, Greeks. That's what this is all about. Everyone knows that America hazes the groups that it wants to sign on to the devil's bargain of white supremacy, and that ultimately your ticket to ride is going to be to show that you're down with anti-black racism. And all of these groups couldn't wait to be the first ones to show how down with it they were. They were tripping over their own shoelaces. And if the only time anyone ever calls out the Hispanic community's anti-black racism is on the blue moon whenever there's a huge scandal like the LA City Council scandal, if that's the only time that they ever talk about it, then they're liars. They're lying by omission, because that is only the tip of a very large, very ugly iceberg. And it's not just limited to Los Angeles or California for that matter. They didn't learn anti-black racism in the US. This is a culture of anti-black racism that they brought from Latin America to here. When white power is kicking them in the teeth, then that's when they start saying, I'm brown, I'm a minority, we have to stick together. At least they'll say it for a few moments. But then you look at what they do when white power isn't coming down on them, and they're every bit as racist and hateful towards black people as any white supremacist. And I'm glad that we got some immigrant brothers calling this out, but they know as well as we do there's a hell of a lot more that needs to be said and needs to be exposed. Because the people who think that they're going to be white supremacist adjacent, they understand that when it comes to immigration, that's been used as a Trojan horse to undermine us. So whenever they see black immigrants from Africa or the Caribbean or South America, they'll go up to them and say, hey, we're all immigrants here. We're not lazy like those Negroes, like the Negritos over there. We're not lazy like them. We're different. That's what they try. They try that mess because that's the same kind of crap that they would do in their home countries. So it's amazing that you got the same people who have just been rampantly discriminating against black people for decades and decades, generation upon generation. Now what's happening is these are the same people saying, where are black people at? Where are the black people at? Well, I don't see any racial thing to be protested here. What's happening here is not racial at all. Trump's ICE raids are not racial. Not because I say so, certainly not because the orange man says so, but because the individuals who are being detained and deported, they're the ones who said so. They identify as white on school applications, job forms, census forms, driver's licenses. They claim to be the exact same race as Donald Trump and Stephen Miller. The individuals who are leading the charge to have them deported, they claim to be the same race as those guys. So what's happening here isn't racial. When somebody claims that they're white European Spanish, even though their skin's brown and they ain't got a drop of Spanish blood in them, that's somebody who's saying that this is not racial. People who went out of their way to exclude us, discriminate against us, and to take part in marginalizing us, and in many cases take part in open acts of violence against us, and have been knee-deep in the oppression that we faced. But anti-black racism for the Hispanic community isn't something that should only be called out by us. The denunciation should also be coming from the Hispanic community itself. Though for a lot of people, that's the dilemma. They want to get white supremacy to call off the dogs, while at the same time hoping to bide their time and get that place as white supremacist adjacent that they've been spoiling for. See, the lack of a loyalty system is what's at the heart of these people fleeing. Black Americans, however imperfectly, we have been loyal to one another. We've certainly been in solidarity. Other groups, by the way, have remarked on this. I've seen YouTube videos where you got Asians who talk about the fact that a person like Clarence Thomas or Thomas Sowell, these people are ostracized. We have very few people, relatively speaking, who actually are out here speaking against what the vast majority of black people are saying. And whenever they do, they are immediately put on the outs. These people can't go anywhere within black society. We're united about what's on code and what isn't, and it's strictly enforced. Now, we may not have the means to deprive these people of the ability to eat the next day, but in every other way, especially association, these people are on the outs. Other groups have seen this, and they recognize that when we have off-code members in our own ranks, these people get ostracized. They can't move around freely among us like they do with everybody else, and that's because white power confused these other groups' internal politics by waving the carrot of being honorary members of the oppressor class in front of them, making sure that everybody knew, hey, you got to make sure that you give black people a lot of abuse and make sure that you're on board with harming black people. As long as you're on board with the oppression of black people, that's your ticket to ride. In response, you'll be given, at least for now, easier access to capital, less harassment by police, and you'll leapfrog over black people because white power will make sure that you do. But every once in a while, be it with the Hispanics or the Asians or whomever, white power will remind them, hey, we got no permanent plans for you. Every time that they have some person who's either Chinese American or Chinese descent who they point to and say, look what this person did, like Wen Ho Lee accusing him of spying, COVID and all the rest of it. Every once in a while, white power reminds them, hey, just so you know, we're not fooled. Just so you know. When white power does that, and you always have these immigrants who are on the take for it, these other groups recognize, they won't say it, but they recognize exactly what the issue is. They're like, maybe we got to be a little bit suspicious. But whenever they have individuals among their own ranks who are on the take for white supremacy and deny what's clearly right in front of them, these other groups recognize, hey, we don't have the ability to call these guys out like black people do. We don't have the ability to point to them and ostracize these people. They just sit here amongst us, and they continue to deny the reality that we all know is coming. Other groups have remarked about the fact that whenever they have these individuals, these agents amongst themselves, the reaction from the group is not to revile these guys or to ostracize them. The reaction is confusion. They're not sure how to respond or even if they should respond. Well, we're not confused. We know exactly what it is and what it's got to be. And I'm not neutral on these ICE raids either. I'm fully in favor of them. They're long, long overdue. I don't have to like the orange man or that boatload of bigots that he pals around with to recognize that at least this policy works. And as for people who think to themselves that they're going to be taking slick shots at us, well, this is a reminder that you really can't be too sure who you're talking to, because as black people have started to get on code, we've begun to actually make our demands known. We've been standing on business, all the delineation, all the rest of it. As we've begun to get very serious, you've had other people, even the black immigrants, who have begun to recognize that. And it's a matter of, hey, they've seen that we are taking the hard line. And a lot of them are like, okay, we see which way the winds are blowing. Slowly but surely, people are having to change their tune. That's what happens whenever black folks, especially foundational black Americans, start to stand on business. Things begin to change. And that's something that black people failed to understand for a while, which happened to be all of that kumbaya talk, and we're going to be running around spending our time trying to find friends and allies. What we've been doing is we've been sitting on our hands, allowing white supremacy and its adjacents to be taking shots at us and undermining our position. And as soon as we said we're not playing that game anymore, now you notice the game's starting to stop. It's getting a lot more difficult for people to do that stuff. Yeah, because we have made it difficult for them. As long as we were sitting on our hands, they could go ahead and do it any way they wanted. As soon as we started to stand up, now all of a sudden, it's a brand new day. So I tip my hat to the black immigrants for speaking out. And I'm also looking at the other black immigrants and asking, hey, why aren't you doing the same? You've heard the mess that's been said. You got your cell phones with you. You're hearing them saying this stuff to you. Call it out. Or you can do like some of the other groups have done, which is to sit back and see if white supremacy will be able to maintain its control. But just keep in mind, if that game goes wrong, well, there's no do-overs. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Tommy Robinson, Neil Saphir, Wesley Monroe, G. Mars, and Atu Hammond. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.